From animated lines and vector graphics to handwriting effects, for all kinds of motion graphics it's important to have good command over drawing capabilities. So in this tutorial I will start with a quick review of the Fusion Paint node, and then I will go on to an intermediate level discussion about the paint modifiers. I will show you how I can connect them, how I can access the underlying polygon and use this to drive certain effects, attach effects, create effects out of multiple strokes, or even use it, for example, to attach an external particle system. So lots of ideas for animated drawings for Fusion motion graphics. Let's start drawing. Let me start at the obvious place for drawing and use the paint node from here. The paint node always needs a background input, so if you are familiar with this stuff already, it will just be a very quick review of what we're doing. So the paint node, I can just quickly, draw any lines, but I have to pay attention. By default, I'm having here the multi-stroke tool available. Here are different tools for painting, and the multi-stroke is the default, which by default only draws on one frame. So you go to another frame and your beautiful drawing is gone. You can change this via the stroke duration, but there's another thing about the multi-stroke, and that is that everything that you draw gets computed into or gets bundled into one modifier. So there is one modifier. This happens for all the paint tools. Whenever you paint something, the paint information, the stroke information gets stored in a modifier, and you can access those modifiers here to change things. However, for the multi-stroke you can't, because it's all bundled into one, and if you change something here, for example the color, it will only apply for the next strokes that you draw, not for the one you have done before. Let me delete those. Here, delete. And instead I will use the single stroke here, and if I draw with the single stroke and I go into the modifier, you see that I immediately have two modifiers, because as soon as you stop drawing, the next modifier gets activated. So stroke 3 is the next one that I'm about to do. If I'm doing it. If not, you can click back, and if it's empty it gets removed again. So stroke 2 was the previous one, and you see I can change it even afterwards and access those strokes. Besides the color, of course, you have the brush controls, make it smaller, make it softer, and so on. I will play more with this a bit later. You have the spacing here. So if you want a dotted line, so basically how a brush works is that Fusion goes along the line and then copies the shape of the brush, which you have up here, as per a certain spacing. That's basically how digital painting tools work, and you have control over it here, and you can, of course, enter numbers beyond the limit. This single stroke is editable. Both here and the line itself can be edited. So if I click Make Editable here, then you see like lots of tiny green dots here, which are the polygon nodes, which were automatically created while drawing. So while you are drawing your pen, it's creating a polygon underneath as you're drawing, and there, if I mark them, it's easier to see. See, there are lots of points which you can, in principle, grab and manipulate like any polygon. So you can delete a few, Shift S to make things a bit smoother. And so on. But there are lots of points, so if you want to draw a smooth line, usually I would directly go to the polygon tool, which is otherwise the same, so polyline stroke. If I do this, again you get a stroke here, but you can immediately draw like one smooth polygon with as many control points as you want to. Otherwise, these two are pretty much the same. Speaking of polygon, of course you can draw with the polygon tools right over here. Yeah, and this is all still probably familiar for many of you, but you can, draw a polyline here or attach it to a background, which is masking off the background or masking off whatever you want to mask off, and you give it a border width, and then you draw with that border width here in the polygon and use the background to change the style, for example, make it white. Speaking of polygon drawing, if you ever need to reveal something with a line, and the typical example is this animated handwriting effect. I think there are like 10 or 15 tutorials on YouTube showing this. All it is do a polygon, follow the line of write something by hand or use a handwritten font, follow the line with a polygon, and then all you do is animate the length as I have done here. So that's all. So you can use a polygon to reveal, and you could use the same with the paint node. But in this case, it may be more efficient because you don't need the spacing and you don't need the actual brush properties. You just need the mask, just an alpha channel. So it's a bit more efficient for those scenarios. And you just animate the length, or if you want, you can also animate the position, which is the starting point for the length parameter. And this is just one long polygon that you see here. And it's gray because it's locked. So if you draw something complex, you can lock it. But if you want to edit it again, it becomes green again. Okay. So much about the polygon. There are differences towards this and the paint node. One is the spacing option, the option to use custom brushes, which you cannot do in the regular polygon tool. Another option is in the regular polygon, you have position and length, which is enough for this, but often I find the approach from the Polyline stroke here more suitable, where you have a write on and write off. Let me bring it into the viewer. In principle, you can do the same thing, right? You have write on, write off to go from, so start and end to go from the beginning or from the end. If you need to animate both at the same time, you can also grab the whole line, and you just have this as one parameter which you animate together. I find this easier to control in many cases, so that's one advantage here. One disadvantage here, sometimes the paint node can sometimes be a bit slower depending on what you do. And the polygon here also has the three-dimensional controls, which can sometimes be helpful, like if you want to rotate something depending on what type of animations you want to do. That's probably enough for a review on paint node and polygon node. So let's start the fun bits. First of all, I can think of effects that I want to apply to my lines. And you can come up with some interesting line styles by doing so. Let me demonstrate the first simple one, and I will start a new paint node here. And again, use the paint node needs to be in the viewer and active both, so that you have all the controls. So let me just create this, go into the modifier maybe later, but first let me add, let's say, a directional blur as one example. And let's see how that looks. So let it set to radial and bring the length parameter up. And this is my effect. So I can make some form of ribbons or stuff like this, even like distortions if I go through. And I can animate the center position if I want to for some fun effects. Linear, then it's more like a shadow. The position doesn't matter anymore, but the angle, you get something like this. So you can start creating some interesting things with this. Sometimes it's fun to combine it with a spacing. So you get like lines, and then again, can play around with this. Now there are of course many effects in Fusion, and you can try them out and try out the Resolve FX and see how you can distort this. This is one option, using things with fast noise and displacement to distort things. Blurs, different blurs and glows and so on. These are all the things you can play with. Now I'm not going to spend the next half an hour trying one after the other. But next, more interesting part, let's see, we want to combine different lines. We want to combine different line styles, types, maybe something dotted with a boundary around or something like this. The obvious choice for this is just copying the paint node and pasting it afterwards, and then changing the modifier here. So I could change the color here and make it smaller. So now I have dots inside. Well, they don't align. If you change the size, then the spacing won't align. So let's not do this. Instead, let's go back to the first paint node and reduce the spacing. So I have dots inside lines, and they look terrible. Let's make them red so that they're visible, right? Like this, for example. This you can just do by concatenation or by merging on top of each other. Sometimes merging or concatenating can be really helpful, especially if you want to mask out something, or if you want to use the apply modes inside the merge for additional effects. So here in this scenario, if I wanted to punch holes into the line, let's assume we have some background which is a bit more interesting, where we can see something. Just for demonstration, I quickly do some. Let's do some gradient or something, just so that we can look through, and maybe not green because not red, because we have red in the line. So if I wanted to punch a hole in here, I can't really do it this way. I mean, sure, I can set it to alpha to 0, but you see the color values from the previous one are still coming through. So if you wanted to do something like this, you would need to separate it out. And in this case, the paint node doesn't do anything without background. So I will create a transparent background of the same dimensions, pipe the transparent background into the paint node here, and then I can use this one, for example, for attach it as a mask. Let's see if that works. And then, well, it does work, but I'm only getting the dots. So I should invert the mask, which should be possible here, except when it isn't. Interesting. Not doing anything. It should, but apparently it's not for the paint node. Okay, fallback option, bitmap node. Bitmap node is generally used to bring color information into the alpha channel. So in this case, it's just creating an alpha mask out of whatever image is coming in. And if there is already an alpha channel, you can also use it to invert the alpha channel, for example. So in this case, I inverted it and I punched holes into my line. That's quite convenient. Only thing is, the way I have set it up here, if I change one of them, I'm not automatically changing the other. So that can be a bit inconvenient. Let's say I want to change the polygon here again. And yeah, let's bring this one into the view and let's draw something else. And you see, well, I'm not drawing the same line here, right? It's just the polygon goes somewhere else. This one is a different one. So it would be great if the same polygon could create both of these, right? So the same line here, the same line could be attached to both of them. And that is actually possible. In the modifiers, you have a polygon inside the polyline stroke. So this green line here, the place of these polygon positions, is saved inside the modifier as, well, in a way somewhat separate. And what you can do is you can access this. So if I go into, if I do a right click here, it says here right click for shape animation. You can animate this if you want the polygon animated, but you can also attach it to another polygon. So you can do a right click here. Pay attention that you are in the modifier. I'm working not on the original tool, right? I'm always working on the modifier. In the modifier, right click and then connect to. And here we have polygon 2, which is this one here. We don't have the one from the paint. So what you need to do is you need to publish the line before you can use it. So here in this polyline stroke, in polyline stroke 1 inside the paint node, so inside the paint node, inside the modifier, I do a right click and do publish. What that does is it makes the line, the green line, it makes it accessible from outside the paint tool. I can always use it within the paint tool, another option which I can show you afterwards, but this way, by publishing it, I can use that green line from the paint 1 node. I can use this anywhere else, and if I want to use it here, I go here into the modifier from the paint 1 node, and here I do a right click, and now if I now go and connect to, I see there is the polyline here, poly stroke 1 polyline value. I can click on it, and now you see the two lines are aligned again. And if I go here and change it, you see both of the lines are changed at the same time. These modifiers, it can sometimes get a bit confusing. It really takes a little bit of time to wrap your mind around what objects you are having. So you are having a paint node. Inside that paint node, you made a paint stroke, which has this polyline stroke, which has here, polyline stroke 1, which has information about the brush, about the color, and then this polyline stroke has as a separate object inside that polyline stroke is the actual polyline, which is the green line. And this is kind of, you know, inside and a bit hidden, so that's why it takes sometimes a bit of time to click, but this is where the line is, and by default the line is kind of hidden in the background. We don't think about it. If we do think about it, if we want to use it, we need to first publish it so that it's available outside, and then in the other tool we have to go into the modifier for the paint. In the modifier, access the shape animation where the line is stored, not just the color but the actual line, and then connect it so that it's using the same line for both of these. And this way, you see, I punch out a hole. If I just want to make something with, let's say, a double line, I could do this, just connect it, and I have a double line which follows nicely the polygon. If you just want to stay within one tool, if you don't need this bitmap mask option, you could do this a bit simpler. You could stay inside the modifier and just add to the polyline one stroke, add a second stroke in the same tool, and then the principle is the same. Let me show it, because I think this principle is complicated for some people. So I make a second stroke, completely unrelated. Let's give it a different color and a different size. This second stroke is on top of the first within the same tool. This stroke again has the color information and brush information, and then in the right click for shape I can connect it, and I can connect it to the first stroke like this. These strokes are still somewhat independent, so they use the same line, but the animation parameters are independent. So if you do the right on, for example, you see that the animation parameters are not linked. And you can choose, maybe you don't want them linked. I mean, for example, the size I don't want linked. If I want like an inner and an outer line, maybe I don't want the softness. But if I want to animate something, maybe I want it linked. So if I want to animate this, if I do want this linked, then I can either use expressions or use the same publishing and connection method that I've just shown you for the polyline that also works for single parameters. So if you just want to use a parameter, you can right-click, publish. I right-click on the end parameter. Now you get another modifier. That's the way how this publishing works. You get another modifier for this end value, which is now accessible anywhere else. And if I go into the other stroke 2, why does it switch to the settings tab? Annoying. Anyhow, I go to the stroke 2, controls, and here right-click on end, and then connect to. And from within stroke 1, there is the published point end, which is now here available and can be linked, and it jumps to that modifier, which is also annoying, and it jumps to the settings tab. I don't know why this is happening, but either way, you go back and you see now the two lines are animated together. So much for combining strokes. So working with these polylines and understanding where the line is, where the actual shape is, how you connect it to other tools, that can be quite helpful for a range of things you can do in Fusion and in motion graphics. So I recommend trying this a few times, maybe try it 2-3 times, and see that you get the hang of it. Besides connecting things, one thing I haven't covered is actually using custom brushes. That is possible to some extent. It's not like a super powerful brush engine like in Photoshop, but you can change the style of the brush to some extent. Let me create a new paint node for this so we can start from scratch. Attach it, and let's draw on the left side and just draw a simple line, and I will go right away into the modifier to change it. I will give it spacing so we can see the individual brush. So there's a round brush which is like being stamped like this in the line, and then you can go into the brush controls and you can change it here, make it hard, but you can also go here and make it an image brush, and by default you have like some balls and options, and I don't know, snowflakes, and I don't know if they're ever useful, but there are a few like strange symbols and signs, but you can do your own, and in that case you can either choose here a clip where you can choose a source file, any image file should work, PNG, JPEG should work, or bitmap, but most likely I just choose tool and then I load either an image or I create something right away inside Fusion. I'm not going to draw an image now. I'll just use for demonstration a text node. And in the text node, I'll choose an icon font. And I have one installed. What do I have here? Icons, right? I have an icon font installed on just the Windows fonts or your computer fonts, whatever you have installed is available. And let me choose one from the character map. Let's just choose an arrow like this. Copy, paste. And you don't see the arrow here, but you see it here. You can scale this down, so maybe you don't need HD resolution for a brush. So you can make it smaller and can set the size here to 1. So I have a large arrow. Let me directly add a transform afterwards, which can help in case you want to rotate it, right? If you want to rotate the arrow. And then I use the transform node and put this as source tool. I can do whatever tools I want, right? Any tool that produces an image can be used here as the source tool. And now you see my brush is becoming arrows. So I can draw with arrows. They all point in the same direction, unfortunately. And there are limited options what you can do now. I have drawn it in white and I can change the color, I can change the size here. I wouldn't generally upscale, because if they are larger than the resolution here, it's probably better to start from a higher resolution here. So generally I would rather think of downscaling rather than upscaling. But so far that's all fine. I have my transform here so I can rotate them around. And if I want them to all point in the same direction, that's fine. So unfortunately, it's not possible to have those custom paint brushes follow the polygon line. It's not possible in the paint node, that is. It is possible via a different technique. It is possible if you basically manually copy it. And by manually, I mean using a duplicate node. Let me show you that because I think there are some interesting concepts which can also be used for other options with the duplicate, with working with polygons and transferring movement over time, transforming time into a stroke, into a fixed replication, a fixed duplication. So I think that's quite interesting. That's why I show you the basics. However, it's also rather technical and I won't build like a full, super comfortable solution. I just want to show you the idea, and if you find this stuff interesting, maybe I do a separate tutorial, because then it will be more about expressions and so on, to build like my own paint tool using duplicate. But the idea is simple to demonstrate. So I use my arrow again. This time I will make it over an HD image, like a small arrow, small size, over a large frame. And in this large frame, I will use a transform node and animate the center position of that transform node, let's say over, for example, 10 frames, to move the arrow around. So it's just moving. Now, what does movement mean? Well, movement means if I have animated a center coordinate, that there is a path attached to the center. The path can be found in this modifier. The path is a modifier which describes how a polygon is being followed over time. And you see there's one parameter animated, which is the displacement, and you can remove that animation to demonstrate this displacement shows how you move alongside this path. It's automatically animated if you change the center position, so there's an automatic solution here. However, you can at any point, this is just a polygon, you can go in there, can activate the polygon tools and can start drawing, and then your displacement will follow the longer path that I've just done, right? So you can change things, can modify as always, just like any polygon, and then this path here will just decide how to follow this polygon. One thing this path has is a heading, so it knows in which direction the path locally points, and this can be used if you go on angle, do a right click, connect to, use the path and connect to the heading. If you do this, then the path is not animated right now. Then use the displacement. You see that my arrow is following the path. So I can have an arrow which is following a motion path, which in itself can be quite useful from time to time. But here what I will do is I will animate this displacement, let's say just over 10 frames, for example, like this. So over 10 frames I have it animated, and then I add a duplicate node. Here it is on the right side. I make 10 copies and give it an offset of 1 frame. So I am copying from 10 times, and in each copy I'm taking a frame further ahead than where I am in the timeline. So I'm on frame 0, I'm taking 1 copy from frame 0, 1 copy from frame 1, 2, and so on to frame 10, and that's how I got my line. It doesn't have to be 10 frames, it doesn't have to be exact frames, it can use half a frame and so on. It can use with time durations that are not like exact frames. It can get in-between values, and it will get the transformation from the in-between position. So you can, for example, set this to 20 and this to 0.5, for example, and it still works. Now I can come up with some clever ways to make expressions out of this, so that that I just have 1 copy slider which decides how dense this is, and then you can make other expressions for the build up and take down and so on. Right now, the way I show it here, it's medium useful because it all depends on this 10 frame animation. So if you play back, it automatically vanishes because the animation is over. One thing I could do is, for example, just as a quick fix, add a time speed tool afterwards, and then left side duplicate, right side time speed, and here I just set the speed to 0, which gives me a freeze frame on frame 0, so I have my line fixed. Again, not super flexible, but there are other ways to play around with this, put expressions in this, put expressions into this displacement animation and so on, and then I can do some interesting stuff with this. Again, I think I'll keep this for a separate tutorial on expressions, but now you have an idea, again, how to use this motion path, how to use the polygon and the displacement and the duplicate node, and maybe you can come up with some interesting stuff yourself with these tools. Last example, I can use the particle tools to paint. Let me show you that part. So I can use the particle tools here. I need a particle emitter, and whenever you have an emitter, you also need a particle renderer. And the particle renderer by default creates a 3D system, but you can actually change it to 2D. And in this case, I just want to draw a line, so I will just stick to the 2D solution. And let me actually turn off the checker underlay here as well, or probably I just need 1 viewer. So these are my small particles here. They are being generated in this circle, but I can go into the emitter where I have a region selection, and I could either use a Bezier or a bitmap. Bezier means I can draw a line, and now they're being generated across this line. If I play a few frames, you start to see them here. Yeah, there they are. Or you can use a bitmap and pipe in an image. It depends on what else you want to do. One issue with this line here is also here you could attach this to other polygons. However, I noticed that they don't line up correctly in some cases because the renderer still does some transforms, and you have here things like zoom and perspective and so on, which doesn't impact this line here, but it changes the image compared to the any reference polygon if you draw a polygon separately, like with the polygon tool, and then connect it. So what I find simpler in this case is, instead of Bezier, change this to bitmap, and bitmap just means you can attach an alpha channel, and you can just draw a polygon like you can always draw it with the polygon tool, give it a border width, and this is the polygon. And now if I attach this to the bitmap, I get it perfectly aligned with particles filling the polygon shape, and I directly have like the width and so on to decide here. Then it's just up to what particle simulation you want to do and what you do with this polygon. I would probably remove the animation here unless you want to animate this polygon, but maybe I want to animate the particles and just leave the polygon the way it is. So I could create for all my particles on frame 0, just one idea how I could use this, make a lot of particles until we can really see it, let's say 1,000 particles. Perhaps to make them stronger, let's add a glow afterwards, always a nice thing for particles. If you don't see them really well, just add a bit of particle glow or something, depending on the style. Let's do this, then let's give them a little bit of, let's give them a lifespan of the whole duration, 120. I will only create them on frame 0. On frame 1, frame 0, I will animate. Frame 1, I'll set it to 0. So this way, there are no new particles coming in. And the particles that I have, I can make them change over the duration of their life. And I can go into the style, color controls, give them, let's say, here, color over life, and give them some different colors over their existence. And this just goes over the duration. And now this could probably become a big particle tutorial if I just keep going like this. But I think what I will do, let me change one more thing. Let me give them a tiny bit of velocity variance, so they start drifting a little bit. And now I change my mind. I don't want this animated on frame 0. I just keep it constant at, like, let's say 200, something like this. But then I will animate my polygon, make the length shorter, and over duration let the polygon wander through the scene with the position like this. Whoa, this looks better than I anticipated. So I have a polygon following this polygon line. The polygon is triggering the particle generation. The particles have a little bit of velocity, so they spread out and change their color over time. And that is this little particle line effect. Now, of course, there are millions of things I can do with particles. I should probably do a particle series of different topics, but just to get this connection between polygon and creating particles. And here you have a simple way of doing this, and then it's just up to imagination and knowledge of the fusion particle system to go on from here. Okay, that's it for this tutorial. A lot packed into it. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time, maybe with some expressions or some particles or something like this. Okay, thanks. Take care.